You can't separate the mind from the body. You can't separate the individual from the environment. That the biology can't be separated from the psychology, and that can't be separated from the social environment. If we look at human beings from this point of view of human needs, which are for connection, and that connection is necessary not just for child rearing, but also for procreation, obviously, also for group formation, and we did not evolve as individuals. We could not have evolved as individuals. If we were rugged individuals, we wouldn't be. It's that simple. Because we could not have survived millions of years of evolutionary pressure as individuals. So what we call rugged individualism is the very opposite of human nature, not an expression of it. In this society, we make a huge distinction between individuality and individualism. There's nothing more predictable and stereotypical than a rugged individualist. Being an individual actually means not just doing your own thing. It means being able to maintain yourself your individuality while in interaction with other human beings. So you're connected, but you're still an individual. That's what it means to be an individual.
What steps can one take to regain one's connection with oneself so that we're not running around shape-shifting, people-pleasing, but at the same time have genuine connections with others?
In the book, we talk about this tension between authenticity and attachment, and authenticity being connected to our true selves, our gut feelings, which is necessary. Nature gave us gut feelings for a good reason. Attachment is our need to belong, and if we can be authentic and belong, that's ideal. If you can find relationships in which you can be our true selves and be accepted and loved, that's ideal. But a lot of our families of origin, our parents just couldn't give that to us. Like, they had their own limitations, they couldn't see us, or they had their own traumas, like I did as a parent. And so kids then get the message that you can be yourself or you can be accepted, but not both at the same time. At which point, for sheer survival's sake, we go with, well, what do we need to do to get accepted? And then we get that message reinforced in school and on the playground and with our peers and at our work. And at some point, you start wondering, who the heck are we anyway?
How did that early emanation result in this complex universe where we have living creatures, and you have these living creatures, particularly called human beings, who have these complex lives, who do so many things that actually undermine their existence and their health. And we do this on a social level, and we do this on the individual level. And all the while, we're loving creatures, and we want companionship, and we want meaning, and we want to belong to the larger unit. We don't want to be isolated. We have some spiritual needs, aspirations. Well, I don't claim to have the answers to all that. I'm just saying the why is so important. Let's begin with something basic. If you have a bunch of plants growing in a garden, and these plants were not developing the way they should, if they were start behaving or manifesting in ways that are pathological, that doesn't further their growth, that doesn't ensure that they have the longest possible lifespan. If you were a gardener, what would you do? Well, you'd have to ask yourself, what is the nature of these plants? And what conditions does the nature of the plant demand for healthy development? And I'm suggesting that rather than looking to diagnose diseases or conditions or behaviors, why don't we look at what is the nature of human beings and what conditions are necessary for the healthy development of human beings, and what happens when those healthy conditions are not met?
How do we fix broken people?
There's a wonderful song by Leonard Cohen called Come Heal or Come Healing. This poet, prophet, visionary, saying we have two hearts. There's the brokenness above and the undivided love that's below, that's underneath. He's saying there's the broken heart above, and then there's a heart beneath that teaching the broken heart. So that implied in that is that nobody's broken. That underneath the brokenness, there's wholeness. So, and that's not only Leonard Cohen, any spiritual teacher, as you know, will tell you the same thing. So it's not a matter of fixing anything broken. It's finding the wholeness that's underneath the brokenness. Now, Douglas is totally right. Studies have shown that if you get children who suffer for first 3 years and then things get okay for them, they do much worse than those children who are well treated and have a good life for 3 years, and then everything goes to pieces. The latter group does much better. Because as Wordsworth says, the child is the father of the man. So that what happens early in life shapes our worldview and our sense of ourselves.
First, we have to understand the word trauma itself. And trauma doesn't just mean bad things happening to you. It's actually not what happens to you, but what happens inside you. The word trauma comes from a Greek word for wound or wounding. So trauma is a wound. It's a psychological wound that you sustain or that persists and leaves an imprint in your mind and in your body. Now, the big T traumas are the ones that people usually identify as traumatic, such as a war, a tsunami, the death of a parent, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, a rancorous divorce, neglect. These are what have been called the big T traumas. And they certainly wound kids, and kids sustain wounds, psychological wounds. As a result, those wounds then show up in their functioning and in their health later on in life. But that's not the only way you can wound kids. You can also wound kids in ways that are very common and normal in this society. For example, in this culture, to tell parents not to pick up a crying child. Well, we're not talking about abuse, we're not talking about lack of love, we're talking about a child's needs being ignored. The child, the infant, has a need to be held. You tell a mother gorilla not to pick up their distressed infant. You tell a mother dog or bear to ignore the distress of the infant. But we're telling parents to let their kids cry it out and go back to sleep on their own. We've been telling this for 100 years. The child doesn't need to be picked up because the child doesn't need to be held. That's an emotional and physiological need of the child. When you're not doing that, you're wounding them. You don't mean to, but you are. So the small T traumas are not the big things that happened that shouldn't have, but the small things that should have happened but didn't. So human children are born with certain inalienable needs. When I say inalienable needs, I mean needs that evolution programmed into us as creatures. Every creature, every being, plant or animal, enters this world with certain needs. If those needs are met, development will be healthy. If they're not, it won't be. Children are also born with certain needs dictated by evolution, and these are for unconditional attachment, connection, being held, received, accepted by the parents. They have a need not to have to work to make their relationship work. So there's nothing the child should have to do. They don't have to be pretty, compliant, smart, good, successful to make the relationship with the parent work. There's nothing they should have to do to make the relationship work, and nothing they should be able to do to break their relationship. That's the second essential need of healthy human development. The third essential human need of children, or a need of human children, is the capacity to experience all their emotions, Now, our brains are wired scientifically, neuroscientifically studied for certain emotional experiences: love, anger, curiosity, lust, fear, grief. These are all essential emotions that human brains are wired for. For healthy development, a lot of parents get the advice, don't allow your kid to be angry. Or when a kid is grieving something, just tell them to get over it. This happens all the time. When we do that, we're denying the essential need of the child. Our children, fourthly, also have a need for free, spontaneous play. So when we give 1-year-old kids this thing, we've just destroyed their capacity to play spontaneously, creatively, and intuitively. Those are 4 essential needs. A lot of children are wounded in this society, not because the parents hurt them by doing bad things, although that happens too, but by not meeting their needs. If a woman was stressed, that by itself did not increase the chance of that lump being cancerous. But if a woman was stressed and emotionally isolated, the risk of that lump being cancerous was 9 times as great as the average. And the physicians and the scientists who did the study, of course, couldn't understand this, because they said, how does 0 and 0 add up to 9? If you, my friend, were stressed right now, which means there were high levels of stress hormone in your body, cortisol and adrenaline, but your friend of yours next to you said, hey, how are you feeling? Do you want to talk about it? Your stress level will go right down. But if you're emotionally isolated and you're stressed, then your cortisol level will stay high for a long time, and cortisol suppresses the immune system, which means that a malignancy is more likely to develop. Which means that cancer is not the disease of the individual. The development of cancer in an individual reflects a lifetime history of relationships to family and to the culture and to society. If you look at, again, Black Americans are more likely to get prostate cancer and more likely to die of it, and not because of lack of medical care. And Black women are more likely to die of breast cancer, even if they have access to good medical care. But why is that? Well, maybe there's something about being a minority in this particular culture that is so highly stressful that it deranges the immune system. So is it an individual problem again, or is it a social problem? It's not what happened in childhood that's the problem. It's what we made it mean for ourselves that is the problem, and what we carry about what happened in ourselves. Now, there was a study this morning, I just came in my email today, a new study that showed that the stress changes the functioning of the nervous system through the activity of the immune system in such a way as to make them more susceptible to the effects of cocaine. This is the latest study. The same thing has been shown in laboratory animals, that if you stress infant mice, that changes their immune system, which induces changes in their nervous system, which makes that nervous system more susceptible to the effects of cocaine. In other words, they're more likely to become addicted later on. I was given to a total stranger in the street of Budapest, a Christian woman who smuggled me out to safety, and I didn't see my mother for 6 weeks. When I saw her again, I wouldn't even look at her for several days. This is simply the emotional withdrawal of the child. It's self-protection. It says that my heart was so bruised when I was open and vulnerable to you, that I'm not going to do that again. So I closed down. When you're in a relationship and you perceive yourself, or you perceive the other person as having hurt you, your response is to withdraw and get kind of sullen. That's the reaction of a small infant. That's one way they can protect themselves, is not to open themselves again. Now, James Baldwin said about the American Black experience, he said that to be a Black male is to be in a constant state of suppressed rage, which is highly stressful. So take a condition like high blood pressure, which is more prevalent amongst, again, Black American males. Well, it's got to be genetic. No, it isn't. Their biological relatives in Africa don't have high blood pressure. The medical science says, we don't know what causes high blood pressure. So out of 100 people, maybe 5 who have high blood pressure because of some other condition, kidney disease or some hormonal disorder. But 95 have what we call essential hypertension. Hypertension is the word for high blood pressure. Essential hypertension is essentially, we don't know what the hell is causing it. That's actually what it means. But slow down for a minute. What if you said the word hypertension slowly? Hypertension. Hypertension. Maybe there's too much tension in these people's lives. And that is affecting the autonomic nervous system. And that is making the blood vessels more narrow. And that increases the pressure that the heart has to exert to get the blood to flow through those narrowed arteries. And maybe that has to do with economic and social and cultural and racial conditions in this country. Traumatization is pretty general in our culture.
Gabor, I was wondering if you could take some time and talk about your own journey from trauma and how it shaped you as an infant in Nazi-occupied Hungary to where you are today, and how that has influenced who you are.
Well, you know, the first chapter of the book opens with my arrival home to Vancouver, where I live, from a speaking trip. And I'm feeling really good about myself because it was a good trip. My talk was well received, and I had a good flight home. And when I arrived back at the airport in Vancouver, I got a text from my wife saying, I haven't left home yet, do you still want me to come? And all of a sudden my mood switches, I become dark, I become angry, I become withdrawn, I become sullen. And when I get home, I'm barely even looking at her. Now, what actually happened here? All that happened was that my artist wife, typical of an artist, was in the middle of creative flow in her studio, and she forgot that her husband was arriving home at the airport. What was triggered in me, however, was the wound of a 1-year-old infant who was abandoned by his mother in an effort to save my life, actually. But the meaning I made of it is that I wasn't lovable, that I wasn't wanted. And even 71 years later, when this woman who I'm relying to be there for me doesn't show up, the woundedness of a 1-year-old infant shows up.